There we go. Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you to our midweek Bible study tonight. Looks like we got a good crowd tonight. And it's only 3 after, it looks like. So we're good. We're good tonight. So starting early. I want to welcome you here to our services. If you're visiting with us, please stick around for a few moments after services. That way we can get to know you and you can enjoy our class time together. We have class in here. We're starting a new class in there, and the teens will be meeting in the, are y'all meeting in the activity building, Justin? Yeah, and the college and young adult class will be somewhere in that direction. I don't know what number the room is, but it's that way. Updates to our sick list and things that we want to make sure everyone is aware of before we get going. Hope everybody got either the phone tree or the text message and the email. I tried to send that out yesterday to make sure everybody got that. But we had 2 deaths that we wanted to make sure everybody was aware of. The first one happened Sunday evening, and when I got that, Blake, when you sent it to me, everybody was leaving. But Jackie Mitchell passed away. This is Blake's first cousin. And her sister is the jelly lady, Nancy, that comes by with all the jelly and gives that to us on Wednesday nights sometimes and visits with us. But she passed away. She was cremated, so her memorial service will be tomorrow at 5 o'clock at Colbert Memorial Gardens. If you're interested in going to that, that will be tomorrow at 5 o'clock in Tuscumbia. Also, Mary Jo Howard, I know she's not a member here. Technically, she's one of our honorary members here because she's still involved in so many of your lives. She checks on so many of you. She calls here often and checks on people. But she's at Atlas now because she's not able to drive. But Mary Jo Howard, her sister passed away. She was a member she lived at Lauderdale Christian. Her name was Peta England. She was 102. And she was also going to be cremated. And they're going to wait and have that service in a couple weeks. Mary Jo's daughter is going to be going off on an Alaskan cruise, and they're going to wait for a little while on that before they have the service on that. So we'll find that out. Mary Jo will let us know, and we'll get that word to you. Other sick that we have, Dee Dee and Debbie, they went to go see Johnny yesterday. Went to go see Johnny and Jasper, and he's having his good days and his bad days, and yesterday was not a good day for him. So just keep Johnny in your prayers. If you haven't, I encourage you, please, send him a card. Send Johnny a card. His address is right over there. He has probably called you at some point during his time here to check on you just to see what's going on. So he would really appreciate a card while he's there as they try to get his medicine and things regulated. Bill Holman has a doctor's appointment tomorrow. He has a new wound on his leg that is not healing from the brace that they put on. They put on a brace from the broken leg that he had, and the brace has rubbed and it's caused a new wound, and it's just a little bitty cut can cause some major problems for Bill that don't heal. So he has a new appointment tomorrow with the orthopedic surgeon. So hopefully that will be, maybe they can do something for him. We'll update you on that. Some good news, Beckett Tillman, who we've announced, the young man that's the cousin of Keith and Kathy Rose, he got to go home. But he's still having some problems. He still has the blood clots. He got to go home with some shots and IVs, so just continue to pray for him. He's still not out of the woods, but at least he's able to come home. Our own little Jackson Holt is going tomorrow for an MRI in Huntsville, and hopefully they're going to be able to find some positive news for him. He's got some foot trouble, ankle trouble he's been having, and hopefully they can find out some ways that they can help him get rid of that and have some positive results from that. Other announcements that we have. You know what? I think that's this Sunday, now get it right this week, this Sunday, we have our singing and fellowship. We're going to be eating in the activity building, and we're doing breakfast style. We're going to be having some breakfast food. So if you got a griddle that you want to bring, we'll be making pancakes. Well, you probably don't need to bring a griddle. We got a griddle. You got a griddle. We got a couple griddles. We got a Blackstone. Can you bring your Blackstone? Yeah, you just come bring your other stuff. We'll do the pancakes. And we'll have all kinds of different stuff here. But we'll have our singing first. And hopefully, Lord willing, we'll be able to unveil something. Hopefully, we're going to have a TV mounted to the wall. Eric Lambert's going to come tomorrow. We're going to look at it. We've bought a TV to mount back here as a monitor for all those that are leading singing. And that way you can see back here instead of when you're leading songs having to do this right here. So you can see it back here. But we've bought one. It's been in there for a while. We're going to mount it back there on the back wall. And hopefully that will be ready by then. If not, we'll live with it. But we've got it. It's going to be ready soon. That's all that I've got for our service tonight. Justin has the devotional. John's got the song service. And Andrew has the prayer that will dismiss us to our classes. So let's go ahead and get started.
Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3, if you would like to turn there. Consistency is key. I love consistency. Now, I may not be a consistent individual myself, but I like consistency. So there's an irony for you, or however you say it. I love consistency, especially with meals. I don't like something. I like to try new things, but I don't like just go off and especially when I go to a steakhouse. Usually, I'm going to get a steak, ribeye, 10 or 12 ounce. I don't want anything too much bigger because I cook, and I know you cook anything 14, 16 ounce, it's harder to cook, and I like my steaks cooked hot and fast. Right? I know when it's not cooked hot and fast because it's different. All right, it's not as tender, and I can tell it. Now, it still may be tender. It's not as tender. All right, I like it hot and fast. I like on Sunday nights. Now, it's hard to do that as a youth minister because every Sunday night, a lot of times you got something with the youth. There's nothing wrong with it, but I like going to a Mexican restaurant on Sunday nights when the stomach will allow it. But that's what I like. I like consistency. I like it. Consistency is essential in everything. And you know that, in your jobs, you're a boss, you're an employee, whatever it is, you need consistency. You need consistency as a boss, how you deal with your employees. You need to be consistent with them. You don't need to be this way one day and another way the other day. You don't need to be harsh one day and then easygoing the other day. You need to be consistent. As an employee, you don't need to show up 30 minutes early one week for a whole week and then the next week you're 30 minutes late for a whole week. That's not consistent. Consistency is key in life for everybody. Well, in Exodus chapter 3, Moses is confronted by an angel in the burning bush, and God is talking through that angel to him and telling Moses, hey, I need you to go to Egypt. I need you to get my people out of Egypt. They're enslaved. They're going through something terrible. I've heard their cry. So go get them. Right? So he's telling them how to do that, what to say. And Moses, of course, keeps saying certain things and questioning, what if they do this? What if they say this? What if this happens? What if that happens? Well, in verse 13, this is what Moses says. Then Moses said to God, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? So when I go to Egypt and I go and say, hey, I'm here to free you, and I'm here on behalf of the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I'm here to help free you. And they say, well, what's his name? What am I supposed to say then, God? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He says, I am who I am. God is the most consistent, is not the most. He is perfectly consistent, more than anything or anyone has ever been or ever will be. His name is consistency. I am who I am. And that word for I am, ehyeh, in Hebrew comes from the root to be. Is. Right? Will be. So God is, he has been, and he always will be. I am who I am. When you see in the Old Testament the word Lord, and that is in all caps, that is his name. Because you see, the tradition is Jews or anyone like that did not want to say his name wrong. So when they wrote this, even in the Hebrew, you cannot even say his name. And they replaced it with the Hebrew word for Lord. When they saw his name, they had certain markings, and I won't go into that, but they had certain markings that signified this is the name of God. We say Lord. And some people may say it's Yahweh or whatever. We don't really know for sure. We know some, but we don't know for sure. And I like to hold that tradition because God's name is great. God's name is the most consistent thing that's ever been. Because he is the most consistent that has ever been and ever will be. God is consistency. His name is consistent, perfectly consistent. We need consistency. We want it all the time. We want to be consistent in our jobs. We want to be consistent for other people. We don't want to disappoint. We don't want to hurt people, drag people down. We need that. We need that consistency. And we want to give that to other people. Well, we have a God that is perfectly consistent. He's always there. He always has been there, and He always will be there. When you cry, when you call out for Him, when you're enslaved, when you're suppressed, when you're abused, when you're hurting, whatever it may be, we're all that way because we're all sinners. Every single one of us needs that consistency, because without it, we cannot be saved. You may not be a Christian, but you know you need that consistency in your life. God is that perfectly, more than anything or anyone else will ever be, and it ever has been. And we as Christians need to hold on to that consistency. If you need anything tonight, if you need prayers, if you need to become a Christian, we're here for you. We're here for you. We love you. If you need anything tonight, please come forward as we stand and sing.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and all that you've given us, Lord. And Lord, just be with us tonight as we all go our separate ways, Lord, once this service ends. And Lord, be with the ones that were mentioned tonight, and be with them and their families, Lord, and help them to get better. Lord, help us take what Justin applied tonight and take it into our lives, Lord. In your son's name I pray. Amen.
Well, good evening to everyone. It's good to be here this evening. We're looking at a new lesson this evening. This is lesson number 3 from our book on Isaiah. This is the coming king. You'll notice right under the topic there, the coming king, there are several things that we're going to apply in this lesson. I'd like to read those because some of them they don't, or Brother Gallagher doesn't say it exactly, but he refers to it. In Isaiah 7:14, we probably all know this one. Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And that particular word is what we're going to be looking at. Well, Emmanuel, Messiah, this kind of thing. Then the next one is Isaiah 9:6 and 7. This is a direct response to what God has said that he's going to do for Mary. It would be her reply, for unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of the peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Then primarily chapter 11, the verse 10 verses is what we're going to be looking at specifically this evening. Chapter 11, verses 1 through 10. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equality or equity for the meek of the earth, and shall strike the earth with a rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fatted calf together, and a little child shall lead them. And the cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw as an ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or be destroyed in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. So we have some great things here said about the coming king, the coming of Jesus. And we noted in the other lessons that Isaiah is one of the most prophetic books in the Old Testament. Some have called it one of maybe the fourth gospel for all the things that Isaiah says about Jesus. We know that Jesus was recognized by many people as the long-awaited king, and he was going to be the good news to the people that were there with him. And of course, he proclaimed that. In Brother Gallagher's introduction, it says the world is always full of terrible political leaders. Now, I don't think there's anybody in here that would necessarily say that was an incorrect statement. We, as Americans, don't have as many terrible leaders, I guess, as a lot of the world does, because we have so many checks and balances and things in our government that cause them not to be able to do a lot of things that they do. Sometimes they do things, I don't know why they do it, but, That's the way it is. He says, I here have no fear that such a comment will be outdated or become outdated, that someone reading this lesson in a few years will find the world that is a world at that time that's actually full of wonderful leaders and nations. And you know, that would be a wonderful thing. That's what we're working for or toward, is to have, not necessarily in our land, but in other lands, to have leaders who are good leaders, good people. And of course, we would hope that they would be Christian people. There might be a different cast of characters, and the nations ruled by the worst offenders might change. He says that I won't list any of the nations or any of the people then, because things can change. But he says that awful political leaders are not prominent. There are not that many that are just awful. Now, there are hot spots in the world and wars going on and all of that, and we know that many of those things are being done simply at the whim of the leaders. They're leading their people with telling them half-truths or no truth in order to get them to do what they want them to do. It says even countries that we consider the best countries in the world, he's not going to list those, but he says the most responsible nations are filled with idiotic and morally depraved leaders. Now, you know, that's a statement that I don't think we can fuss about. It's a bit strong, but indeed it is. Some of the people who rule in our world don't know how to rule. They just simply impose their way of thinking on other people. And of course, that causes a lot of problems. He says he didn't think that was too harsh. Well, what kind of leaders do we want? He said there are examples of good leaders in the history of our own country. He says, I'm not a historian, but I'm not really in a position to say who's best or who's worst. But he starts off by talking about George Washington. Now, I think that most of us would believe that George Washington was a great president. Of course, we don't have anybody to compare him with before him because there wasn't anybody. But we notice that there are a lot of people that get all tore up about things. And as he says here, recently some Americans have threatened to tear down the monuments dedicated to Washington. Well, they want to tear down doesn't matter who it's to, they want to tear it down, do something else with it. And the reasons that people might not like Washington, I think, are probably great or good in their own sight. It says here that Washington owned slaves, and he did. That was a time when our country had slaves. It was normal, I guess you'd say. I've often said if I lived in the time, I would have been a poor sharecropper probably, because I don't have enough to pay $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 for a slave. But Washington had about 135 slaves during his time as president. One of the things that we might look at is that what he wanted and what he did might not have just exactly meshed. The idea is that Washington had slaves, and yet during his time in office, he was trying his best to do away with the slave trade from Africa. Now, a lot of people wanted the slavers to quit bringing slaves into our country. Don't get people from Africa and bring them over here. We're going to end that. But if the slaves are already here, then we'll just continue with the slaves we have. And he did. He had good reason to have slaves, I guess. He owned a what you might call a plantation. But, as it says here, some people reason that he didn't have any good reasons, and again, he may not have. Most of his slaves were set free once he died. Now, he mentions also Thomas Jefferson. And I want to make sure I mention exactly what he said, because it kind of took me back. Perhaps the greatest president Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, words, that are wonderful and inspiring and put pressure on Americans for hundreds of years to live up to those lofty sentiments. And Jefferson himself was a hopeless sinner. Okay, we could probably look at that. Jefferson also had slaves. He had many more than Washington did, because I didn't know this till I was looking at some bit, but Martha Washington was married twice. Her first husband died and left her a considerable amount of money, slaves and other things. But the slaves that she inherited went with the land. That is, she could not set them free. They belonged to the estate. And just because her husband was dead, that didn't change anything. So that meant that Jefferson had slaves too. They put them together. They combined had, I think, about 600 slaves when we got all said and done. But we understand that Jefferson had a mistress. Her name was Sally Hennings, and she was 7/8 white, as I understand it. And he had 6 children with this woman. And, you know, it looks like if he was in that kind of a situation, he might let his slaves go. But, again, something I did not know, Thomas Jefferson died almost penniless. He was in debt up to his throat. And, of course, what was going to have to be done is the slaves were going to have to be sold to pay off the debts. And so that happened. But as he says here, the lofty sentiments that Jefferson had in the Declaration of Independence were just, you know, groundbreaking. It was something that people just didn't hear about. Most people lived under kings, and the king did what he wanted to. And he could do what he wanted to you. And so we find out that the words were good. But I guess even if we look at it from that standpoint, Washington and Jefferson's not the worst presidents we've had. But our best leaders, maybe the best we'll ever experience, and they were in many ways terrible. And again, if I were elected president, which I will never be because I won't run, I'm sure that everybody would dig up the dirt on me as much as they could. And I'm sure they've done this. I was listening to a podcast just this afternoon on this very subject, and the lady that had written a book back in I think about 1999, was saying that the children that Jefferson had were by this Hemmings woman. And said a lot of people didn't like that. A lot of people didn't like what she uncovered, but, you know, as far as anybody can tell, that's what it was. Now, some have come and said that really that the children that came of this woman were really from his nephews. And, of course, that's just deeply flawed in itself. But we want leaders to bring justice and righteousness, to help those who are oppressed, society of wickedness. We want people to have protection. We want people to have peace. And the best leaders succeed very imperfectly in only some of these ideals and make no progress in others at all. So we have people that, I guess you might say, have their axe to grind or whatever, and they do that and let other things kind of go. We notice, and of course with the war in Ukraine, we look at Vladimir Putin and think that he is just the most awful person in the world. How could he do this to people who are basically his own people, killing them, messing up their cities, and doing all of these particular things? And we have to pray that he would be converted, that he would repent of the things that he's done. But if he doesn't repent, then we can pray that God will take his hands against him, that he would do with him whatever he might. And I'm not sure, you know, sometimes it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. If someone were to take him out for some reason, there might be a worse person take his place. I don't know. But in ancient Israel, we know from studying our Bibles that there was a lot of places where There was a lot of injustice, a lot of places that wanted peace, that they were looking to their king to give them that, to have some peace and some justice. Treat us the way we ought to be treated. But Isaiah promises, in the things that we've just read here, a king that would do everything right. A king that would be not necessarily just over Israel, but he'll be over us as well. And he'll be everything that we could hope for in a leader. Now, when we read through this, sometimes the scriptures that we read, it talks about the stump of Jesse. We might think, oh, he's talking about David, but he's not. He's talking about Jesus. He's talking about the Messiah. Jesus came through the through the line of Jesse and David and all of those, obviously. And so here Isaiah is saying we're going to get someone that is going to be an ideal king, to be the very best. We think back about the kings that came. David was a great king. He had his faults, as we all do. But we notice that even in his son, in Solomon, the man that is supposed to be the smartest man that has ever lived, it's what the Bible gives him, so I'll give him that. But we know that he too had problems. He started getting wives from everywhere, and it seemed that each one of them brought their own religion with them. And it even came to the point to where he was building temples and groves and other things for these wives to have a place to worship. And some say that he even fell into some of these things himself. But we know that the devil, if he can have us to worship anything but God, that's what he wants us to do. He's satisfied with that. You can be just as religious as you want to, as long as you're religiously wrong. You're not doing it the way God said. So Isaiah 11 is a messianic passage, meaning that what they describe here, what Isaiah is describing, is the appearance of this ideal king, one that would come in the future. And the passage does not use the Hebrew word Messiah, but what you'll find is that the term Messiah appears 38 times in the Hebrew Bible. I would have expected to be more than that. But it hardly ever refers to what we think of as the Messiah. Many times in the Old Testament, this word that is sometimes translated Messiah can refer to kings, it can refer to priests, and it can refer to people who are anointed, I guess is what he says here. So if you look at people who are going to be going to have some kind of process, actually it means rubbing. It means to rub with salve. And when a king was put in office, if you want to call it that, he was always anointed with oil and other things, I'm sure. But it doesn't just mean Messiah the way you and I would think of Messiah. The Jews, as I understand, still are looking for the Messiah. And again, they have no idea the way we are looking for a Messiah. The Jews, after their defeat in AD 70, the temple was destroyed and they didn't have any place to do their worshiping, their sacrifices, and all of these things, that they turned to more of I guess it would be a spiritual system. They don't do sacrifices any longer, but they seemingly believe that, if they're just good, that everything's okay. They do pick out, if that's a good way to put it, they pick out a Messiah for every age. That is, there is a Messiah for the Jews right now, among the people of the Jews. And when this guy passes from the scene, there'll come another. And so the Messiah, as they understand him, is not just one person, but it is a continuation of people. And it's usually one of the big rabbis that is standing out in the forefront during their lifetimes. But even as it says here, usually you think of a king as being one who is anointed, but there are other things doing that too. He says Daniel's prophecy of 70 weeks has this term twice within it. And this is Daniel 9:24-27, and it's pretty long, but I'm not going to read all of that to you. But in here, it talks about the 70 weeks of Daniel that he is prophesying about when the Lord would come. And he talks about being a prophet, and that he is to be anointed in the most holy place. So when you talk about anointing people, as the Jews looked at it, then this could be a Messiah. The king could be a Messiah because he's anointed. A priest could be the Messiah, or anyone that had a prominent place that would be anointed. And here Daniel talks about these things. He says that, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half a week he shall put an end to sacrifice and to offerings. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decree end is poured out on the desolator. Now, this thing about Daniel's 70 weeks is a fascinating thing to look at, and it's longer than we could ever do in one meeting. But the idea is he's trying to say that we have one coming who is going to be the Messiah. He's going to be anointed of God, and he is going to be the one that people follow. Now, he's going to be the one people follow because he is fair and just. He is consistent, if you will. And these people, and when you say about people following him, we're not going to talk about the whole world, because the whole world's not going to follow Jesus. The Jews didn't even follow Jesus, but many, many will. There are some, as it says here, who are debating the fact that this particular 70 weeks thing is different. And you know that if you get a bunch of people together and try to come up with what something means, especially something that is this difficult to understand, that they're going to have different attitudes about that. So if you get one commentator, he might say one thing and another mean another. It says the bottom line is that the passages in the Hebrew Bible, that the term Messiah are not the passages that actually talk about the Messiah. Don't talk about Jesus. So why do we use the term Messiah to talk about the coming king when the Old Testament does not? And of course, because it's the New Testament. The New Testament talks about Jesus as the Christ, Christos. And it appears in the New Testament 529 times, and it always refers to Jesus. The word is related to charo, to anoint, and Christ actually means anointed. And so we have Messiah in the Old Testament talks about people being anointed. And then you have the same thing with the idea of Christos, or Christ, being anointed in the New Testament. The Greek equivalent, of course, as we said, is Messiah. It's because the New Testament constantly refers to Jesus as the Christ, the anointed one, that we refer to him as the Messiah, the anointed one. So in Hebrew it's Messiah, and in Greek it's going to be Christ. And sometimes we put it all together, and there's nothing wrong with that. We know too that as the Messiah, he is often referred to as a king, which in the Old Testament they were anointed. Well, even in the New Testament, I guess there was somewhat of anointings with the Roman kings and these kinds of people. But it's not for the same reason that the Jews were doing it. It says if we were to understand the expectation for a Messiah in the ancient world, we need to look at passages in the Old Testament that promise the coming of an ideal king. So if they're talking about the Messiah from the Old Testament standpoint, they're looking for an ideal king. Now, how many ideal kings were there? Well, very few. But that's what they're coming from. Yes? Right. Mm-hmm. Well, as you said, there Saul was God's anointed, and that's what David said. I cannot kill the Lord's the one that He has decided, and of course that's what all of the people among the Jews should have believed. This is God's choice, and this is who we're going to go with. Just like rulers in our own day, if somebody passes a law that is put upon us, we are obliged to obey it. Now, you can have laws overturned and all those kind of things, but when those people who are in charge of making laws make a law, we have said we're going to obey that. And the same thing, even more so, with Saul, because God is the one who picked him, and he was God's anointed. He was the one God put in charge, and who is it that could take him out? Who could kill God's anointed? That would be something that would be saying, I know better than God. So David was going to bide his time because he already had ideas of what was coming, and he let Saul, just have his way, I guess you'd say. And again, we know that when these people anointed someone, that was generally with the understanding that God approved it, for priests and kings and other people. And so the people obeyed them. Now, when they did something wrong, that kind of infuriated the people, I suppose, because you would say, well, here is a guy that's been anointed by God. Surely he had the heart and the thoughts of being God's servant, but he's messing up. He's doing, but we all do that. We all do things that are not right, and therefore they simply, it seems like, just live through them. You have Ahab and all these others that were poor leaders, and there was the wife who was a poor queen. But the idea is you have him put in place, and the people just accept it. Now, they might hate him, they might not love him, but he's still the king. So that's what happens. Now, the same thing is going to happen, even what Isaiah is saying here. There's going to come a Messiah, there's going to come a Christ who is going to lead us all, lead the world in those who will respect God's law and accept him for who he is. Now, again, we know that people in the days of Jesus, especially among the Jews, did not accept him for who he was. And because they were doing things against Jesus, they were doing things against God, because God put Jesus in the position of the Messiah. You might think even that the Messiah put himself there. Jesus volunteered, if you will, to be the salvation of the earth. And he came here and he did everything perfectly. We can't go back and look at anything that Jesus did and say, well, that was bad, because Jesus did things perfectly. A lot of people didn't like him, but that's human nature, I suppose. Do the best you can, and some people still won't appreciate it. Well, in Isaiah 11 is what we read a moment ago about these people being anointed, having things done that would prove their kingship or their being a prophet or a priest. It says, how do we know that Isaiah 11 is talking about an ideal future king, the Messiah? It says it doesn't use the word Messiah, and it doesn't even use the word king or kingdom. Neither does it talk about David, as some other messianic texts do. In Ezekiel chapter 34, verses 23 and 24, it says, "And I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he shall feed them. He shall feed them and be their shepherd. And I, the Lord, will be their God. And my servant David shall be a prince among them. I am the Lord, I have spoken." So, who could go against God or go against David without going against God? He says this is how it's going to be. And of course here it's something that is speaking of a kingdom that God approves of and a king that God approves of. But are they talking about the Messiah? Well, not in the sense that we take it. They're not talking about Jesus. Okay, we'll take up right there next week. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you can come back next week and continue our study in Isaiah. A lot of good stuff in here.